Good morning, everybody. I've got a very special treat for you this morning. Often we do Ask Dr. Doreen and we do just 1 hour live. And this morning, for those of you who are tuning in live, you're going to get a special treat because we're going to do 2 hours live in just a second. The second hour, we're not going to, other than doing it live, we're not going to release that until next week. So only those of you who are watching live are going to get this special treat. So my friends, it's time for Ask Dr. Doreen. I think I was on the wrong camera.
The advice and opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh is the
Dr. Doreen is an expert in autism.
Doreen Granpeesheh.
Dr. Granpeesheh.
Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh.
Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh is a visionary in the field of autism. Now you can ask her questions on Ask Dr. Doreen.
Good morning and welcome to this very special edition of Ask Dr. Doreen. I'm Shannon Penrod and I'm here with the fabulous, the wonderful Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh herself. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you and good morning. How are you?
I'm excited to be here and I'm excited. We talk about this every once in a while, but for those of you who are just tuning in, we're going to do 2 hours live this morning.
Right.
And then the second hour, we won't air again. It won't be podcast until next week. It'll drop next week. But for those of you who are watching live, it's a rare opportunity to get to see extra and more, and you can be writing questions throughout both hours. And we do have a lot of questions that have come in the last week.
Yep.
Some of them that I really want to get to. I want to say, though, first of all, for those of you who are watching, we're live right now on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and about a dozen other sites. Traven will be showing you some of those sites in just a second. Also want to let you know that this first hour will be podcast almost immediately after the show, and the second hour will be podcast next week. And it's available wherever you get your podcasts. And actually, I should qualify that. Wherever you can download a podcast for free. It is no cost to you to download the podcast. I do want to remind everybody that we were doing the podcast in both video and audio everywhere. And then you guys resoundingly told us that you don't need the video when you're downloading the podcast, that you like to take us on the go. We appreciate that. I love that some of you are walking or driving and listening. So right now, if you want to watch after the fact, and you want to watch video, the place to do that is YouTube. Everywhere else, you can download the audio podcast for free. And let us know if you need something different than that. But we're thrilled and delighted to be here. We've got people who are already writing in. Kanza, we're saying hello and good morning to you. Holly, Pam, Pam,
I know.
it's Parker's mother, Pam. I feel like I'm meeting a rock star. My heart beat faster when I saw that, Pam. Pam, like you and I have to have coffee sometime. What an amazing son you have. It's such delight, right? We all love Parker.
Pam. It's nice to have you.
Yes. Dark Angel, you're here with us. We love that. And Liliana is already saying good morning from Riverside. If you would like a shout out, please send in your question or your comment because we're following them as closely as we can. And Holly says, thank you for this special. And I thank you for this special.
Oh, it's so lovely to be able to finally answer all the questions.
Yes, hopefully. I don't know that we will get to all of them, but we're going to try. For those of you who don't know Dr. Granpeesheh, she's a true expert in the field of autism. She's been working in this field for more than 40, yes, I said 40 years. She's worked with all kinds of individuals across the spectrum, from very young babies even up through senior citizens. She is known and renowned for being someone who looks at the whole individual, not just a diagnosis, is interested in their medical health and well-being, their ability to learn, their ability to communicate their needs, their welfare, but also for the welfare of the families around them who love them. So one of the many reasons why I adore and follow her.
Thank you, Sharon.
And you can watch her here, but you can also watch her on TikTok and on Instagram. She's where all the hip happening things are. I'm not that hip. haven't figured out Instagram yet. I'm not even playing. But that's okay. Traven understands it. You understand it, and I'm just riding the ride.
Instagram is much easier than TikTok. TikTok is the one to figure out.
Well, and I don't really understand TikTok except to watch.
Yeah.
And sometimes I will go down, not often, but sometimes I go down that rabbit hole, whatever. And then I watch all the crazy things, like for a while when people were having to start their car, have it in gear, and sing and dance and run and to get into stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life. I mean, that's a stupid thing. I'd much rather watch you talk about all the possibilities for us and our kids on TikTok. It's a much better use of your time. Can I say that? Oh, okay, Pam, I see. But I'm excited that you're there with Parker watching. That's super fun and a thrill. I'm sorry that the internet is down in your house, but I'm sort of thrilled that we get to be here with you, Pam. Pam, you're a rock star. Okay, so anyway, Dr. Granpeesheh is here to answer your questions. We do have to give the disclaimer that there is no expert in any field that could give individual specific advice in this format. It's too hard. Even, those of you who we get to know, we don't get to know everything, right? And it's much easier to give expert advice when you have eyes on the situation. But we do encourage you to write in as extensively as you want, especially to include the general area that you're writing from, because services are different in different places of the world.
Definitely.
And tell Dr. Granpeesheh what's going on, what's on your heart, what you have questions about. She's very intuitive and she will ask you more questions, which is extra fun. And then she will let you know what her thoughts are on it, but then you can take that back to the expert that you have that has eyes on the situation. So if everybody understands those ground rules, we can sort of jump in. May is saying hello from Rhode Island. Yay! And Esoteric Gold, we're thrilled that you're here with us as well. Okay, I want to say that every show now we're starting with a theme.
Yes.
And today's theme is talking about stimming.
Oh, okay.
So I wondered if you could start, and then we have a lot of questions that actually have to do with a lot of automatically reinforcing, which is not necessarily the same as stimming. But I think that this is one of the great misunderstood areas of autism. This idea, and everybody uses this term stimming. I hate it. I super hate it. Is somebody sneaking in? We're on. Hello. Okay, thank you. No, we just have a delivery from FedEx, Traven, at the door. So the FedEx gentleman just joined us almost on camera. Thank you. That's never happened before. Yes. No, and Traven has reminded me it isn't stimming. So I had Traven in the ear and the FedEx man at the door. If we just had a cat that needed to go in a kitty litter box, I would have had a full complement here. Okay, so I said it was stimming, and because my head was on that, but it's sensory issues. We're talking about sensory issues
Oh, I
today.
see. Today we're talking about sensory issues.
But
Okay.
eventually we'll talk about, because more of the questions were about stimming, but we're talking about
see.
sensory issues.
That's
this morning.
wonderful. That's wonderful.
We'll
It's
talk
one of
about stimming
those-
another day.
Yeah, and maybe we can talk about it in the second hour.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
The thing about sensory issues, which I love, and I'm very happy we're getting to talk about it today, Shannon, is that these issues were not even recognized as part of the diagnosis of autism until the last diagnostic manual came out.
Which is
I think
crazy.
It is crazy, because for years and years, I mean, I would say that even, and I've often talked about how one of the benefits of being able to be in this field for 42 years is that you see the change of autism. Like, you see how autism itself has changed, or the symptoms that we see in the kids, right? And in the 70s and 80s, it was a very, very severe disability, like extremely severe. I can't even explain how, like when I say severe, we're talking extreme self-injurious behaviors and so on. And it seemed very, like the thing that seemed very obvious to me was that a lot of the children were suffering from sensory overload. And yet it was not even recognized. In fact, when occupational therapy first brought in sensory integration, it was kind of mocked. And people were like, what is this now,
Yes.
And so I'm very happy that in the last diagnostic manual, which I think was like 2013 or something, we were able to add sensory dysregulation as one of the symptoms, actually core symptoms of autism?
You know, because I can remember in 2013 when the new criteria was coming out and people were panicking. And I just want to remind everybody, because I say this about you all the time, that I truly think you're a visionary, and I think that you have the ability to see around corners. You have a very logical head, you're very good at perspective taking, and you see trends, you put things together. And everybody was freaking out, and
I
you
was
were
quite
not
happy with it.
You were not, and you were saying
Yeah.
everybody should take a breath, let this play out. I think especially the people who had been previously diagnosed as Asperger's were
Yes.
very concerned that they were being nullified,
Yes.
that they were going to be, you know, just wiped out of everything. And you were the calm head in the middle of the storm who was saying, I think this is going to shake the way, if it works properly, this is going to shake down to more services for you.
Yeah.
Because too often people were saying, well, you know, you can do this one thing, so therefore you don't need help and support.
Well, actually, I mean, even more than that, like when you had in the past, when you had a diagnosis of Asperger's, you literally were not eligible for certain services with that diagnosis.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they now, you know, merged Asperger's and kind of what used to be was PDD-NOS, if you remember, which
Yes.
was pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, which is
But you know, the parents don't
You
think of
know.
it as that. Parents say pediatrician didn't diagnose.
oh, really?
Because that's what PDD stands
That's
for.
hilarious.
Yes,
so
that's
funny.
what, yeah.
So like all of that now became kind of part of the spectrum. And because it became part of the spectrum, no matter what area of the spectrum you were on, you were eligible at least
Yes.
for services, which I think was important. And sensory was brought in, which is another really important thing. But the other thing that was brought in was medical,
Yes.
which I love, the fact that there was actually reference to the fact that there might be underlying medical issues, which I think is huge, huge.
Yeah. So I just want to remind everybody that, you know, you were the person who was saying, I think we're going to get more services for people who otherwise in the past would have been considered Asperger's. I think that, you know, you were saying we're going to include medical issues in this. You were also somebody who said it's now going to address sensory issues, and there's going to be a renaissance there. But the other thing that I remember you championing was that they changed a clause in it that, and I don't remember what the wording is now, but it was something about it has to have presented before a certain age.
Before age 3, right. And that's kind of, I mean, it was there before, but it is now, it's pretty clear that it has to present before age 3, and that's also an important part of this, yeah.
Yeah. So, just more proof of why people should listen to you, because you saw all of that. So we're talking about sensory issues. So it is a part of it now, and a recognized part of it, and people should not be pooing that. And I think it's a real measure of, you know, when you talk to somebody about what your or your child's sensory issues are, if they are like, oh, well, you know, that's not a part of this, I think those are people to walk away from. Not necessarily run, but walk away from.
Well, or educate, right? I mean, if you
yeah.
can, right?
Yes.
If you can. And a lot of times people, it's just, you know, this is a field where we are still learning.
Yeah.
And so when people are closed-minded about things, it just drives me nuts, right? Because even today, I opened up my social media, and the very first thing I saw was 3 comments from people. I had a video, I think, on TikTok, which basically said, I think the title of the video is even like, what is good ABA?
Yeah.
And there was just the first 3 comments were, there is no good ABA.
Right.
And it's, you know, we cannot be closed-minded when it comes to autism and autism treatment. We're still learning. We have to be open to different things and listen.
Yes, absolutely. I want to acknowledge Pam, who says that 20 years ago, and nobody was saying anything about sensory issues, and it was really hard. Anna, who's saying hello. And Dark Angel asks the question, how do I know if my son has severe autism? Which is an interesting question.
It's actually a great question. And it has to do with, I think, a couple of different things. It has to do with the number of symptoms that your child presents, because so the diagnosis of autism, and if the viewers want, I can actually go through it at one point where we just focus on the diagnostic criteria at a different show. The diagnosis it has two kind of sections. One section is what we call social communication section, and the other section is the repetitive, stereotypical repetitive behaviors, the stimming, as you referred to before. And, well, actually, the stereotypical repetitive behaviors is where also under that category, they've also listed the sensory and so on. But anyway, there's a number of symptoms within each, and you don't have to have all symptoms. You just have to have a certain number within each category. Now, if you happen to have more of those, then obviously there's a little bit of more of the disability, right, that you're dealing with. So, for instance, in social communication, it could be that you are unable to interact with peers. And of course, that is, vocally interact with peers or verbally interact with peers, and that's difficult, right? That for sure is a difficult thing. But you could have that, and on top of that, also have a delay in non-communicative, non-vocal or types of communication, like eye contact and body gestures and so on, which means at that point, you're also not able to look at people, not able to read body language, not able to understand a lot of nuances of communication. So the more symptoms you have, the more the disability is affecting you. Now, also within each of the symptoms, you could have multiple issues. For example, when we talk about self-stimulatory behavior, or just that category of repetitive stereotypical behaviors, you could have just a couple. Like, for instance, a lot of children who are anxious will line up objects, and that is classified as one of the self-stimulatory behaviors, lining up objects. On the other hand, there are children who have such severe sensory issues going on that they have 10 different self-stimulatory behaviors. For instance, they will not even be able to look, they will be gazing, they will be throwing stuff, they will be spitting just to see the direction of the spit, they will be doing this. So the more symptoms you have, you are struggling with a more severe form of autism, because all of these symptoms make it harder for you to learn. And I think that is the key to the severity aspects of it. And we do have, Shannon, that's the other reason I really liked the 2013 version, is that now that they put kind of ASD as a whole into one spectrum, what they also did was they gave us the ability to put down in each area, so one in the area of social communication and one in the area of stereotypic repetitive behaviors, a number from 1 to 3, indicating severity, and the way they define it is indicating the level of support required.
Yes.
So if it's a 1, you need a certain amount of support, but if it's a 3, you need a ton of support in that area.
Yeah.
And this is super important because a lot of people, when they diagnose, they do it wrong.
And give one number.
I mean, it's just, you give one number, and you cannot give one number, because there are children who are pretty high functioning and very minimally affected in the area of, let's say, stereotypic repetitive behaviors, so they would get a 1 there, but they're very affected in the area of social communication, so they might get a 3 there. And a child whose diagnosis is 3-1 is extremely different from a child whose diagnosis is 1-3.
Yes.
I mean, it's just it's important, because that helps us as diagnosticians paint a picture of the particular child's needs. And until we know more about autism, that's all we have. We have the ability to describe each individual as accurately as we can, so that we can treat them according to their needs and not according to a cookbook. So that's why I'm very, I think those numbers are super important.
So what I remember when my son was first being diagnosed was that all I wanted was somebody to be honest with me and say, where is my child on this spectrum?
Right.
Like, is my kid going to be Bill Gates, or is my kid ever going to be out of diapers? He was 2.5. And I just wanted somebody to be honest with me about that, and no one would be. And I railed against that. I was like, why won't somebody, and sometimes people would say, well, we just don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know where he's going to end up. And I sort of I needed somebody to tell me like what was the best case scenario, what was the worst case scenario. Now looking back on it, I'm glad that no one did, because then I had to go out and I wouldn't look for the worst case scenario. I would look for the best case scenario, and I would ask questions of how did you get there?
Yes.
But later on, when my son was doing better, I got to look at documents and see that they had classified him. Back then it was, there would be mild to moderate or moderate to severe. And he was classified as moderate to severe. And I know. And I think that would have devastated me
Yes.
when he was little. I think that would have taken the wind out of my sails, and I might not have been able to do what I did.
Right.
Right? So I'm kind of glad that nobody told me that. But I do want to put that into people's backpacks, that what they say about you and your child, when people say things when they are younger, that there are different times and places in the course of a parent's time with their child with autism and their child's development. And I want to say that if your child is under the age of 5, take it all with a grain of salt.
Well, even if they're over the age of 5, because the reason that they're learning, so
Yes.
this changes.
Yes.
So you could, and I have started with children who are severe. I mean, when you say severe, that means the child is continuously self-stimulating. So
Yes.
like, and I will describe a child to you, and I want to see if you can guess. They're running around in circles and going ee like that, right?
Yeah.
Not vocalizing at all, not interacting at all. Very, very resistant to any kind of learning, tiptoeing everywhere and just running extremely hyper, and not able to communicate their needs, not potty trained, not even paying attention to what's going on in the environment. That would be a child who's severe. But then over time, that child learns to stop running around and sit down and pay attention, and that child learns to request things instead of hitting and being aggressive. And that child learns to listen and learn from their environment, observational learning. And as that happens, they're no longer severe, right? And they are still affected, but now they might be moderately and then very lightly affected. And then that's how we actually help children overcome this diagnosis, right? Is they learn. And it doesn't have to be a young child. It could be anyone, if you really think about it, Shannon. If you're learning to overcome those parts of your disability, then you're no longer struggling with them. It's really that simple.
And I love that, and I get emotional about it because you didn't get to meet Jem until he was a little bit older, but people that you trained were working with him, and it was like a year ago that I showed you video of him. And you were like, oh, wow. Because he'd made so much progress by the time you got to actually be in the room with him, which I fought for, by the way. But anyway, I don't mean to discount the children that are over the age of 5. What I was trying to say is that I wouldn't listen to what anybody says prognosis-wise with a child under 5. I would take it with a complete grain of salt. When your child is between the ages of 6 and 10, I would not give up at all. I would still be fighting, but I would be asking more pointed questions if your child has already been in therapy and not making progress. I do see that when children start to be 11 to 13, that is when the reality police kind of come in, and sometimes parents have to go through a grieving process to realize, okay, I'm not going to win the lottery here in terms of my child,
completely losing all symptoms.
Right. And that, and maybe there's something else that's going on in there, and it really is a very hard time between the ages of 11 and 13, because it's really when you start, I think on both sides of the fence, you start to say, okay, I have to change what I think is going to happen. And I'm going to say that, my good friend Nancy Osbaugh-Jackson, who's going to be here on Thursday to do our Halloween show, what was interesting was that we were very good friends with boys on the spectrum, and we had to go through that time together with different outcomes.
Oh, absolutely.
And that during that period of time, Nancy was realizing, oh, my child is not going to recover, and I need to start making plans for the future of how we're going to continue to help him to grow, and he has.
Yes.
But that what his life is going to look like and how much support he's going to need, and it was really devastatingly hard for her. And I was sitting directly next to her, hosting a show with her, with a child that it was occurring to me that maybe my child was going to be like, and that hadn't, as much as I had fought for that, I didn't have a world prepared for him to go away to college.
Yeah.
I didn't have a world prepared for that he was not going to live at home, you know, because it's that Schrodinger's cat of you don't know what it's going to be, and then suddenly you do get an idea of what it's going to be, and you have to deal with the outcome. And believe me, I have survivor guilt, you guys, and Nancy and I have shared that with each other and shared a lot of tears over it. It's a hard time, that period of time.
Sure.
But I think that moment when the child is 13, when you're having to like look at, okay, which road am I probably on? I think so often people have 4-year-olds and they want to know. And I don't want them to know at 4.
So this is kind of an important discussion because I think in your case it was 11 to 13.
Yes.
There are parents who will know at 6.
Okay.
There are parents who will still not know at 13.
Yeah.
So it's very, very hard to know when things are plateauing.
Yeah.
Because you're living with the child day to day and you won't see the changes unless you are, away from the child for 6 months or something. It's just hard to see. Now, I want to say that the way that I look at it, Shannon, is that learning with our kids is interesting because we're learning as they're learning.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting kind of dynamic when you do good therapy because you're not just going in and saying, these are the things you need and I'm going to teach them to you and we're good to go.
Yeah.
You start out with a picture of what you think the child needs, right? You're like, okay, I need to teach you how to request things. I need to teach you how to imitate sound, whatever it might be for that child, right? You have this huge array of skills that you want to teach and you start. And then as you start this process, you're like, oh, well, you're not learning, so I guess I have to figure out why. And you put your curriculum aside for a minute, which is the content, and you start figuring out the child's modality of learning. And this is very pertinent to the whole sensory issue.
Yes.
And you start thinking, okay, wait a minute, you're a fully visual child, and everything I've been saying to you right now is just coming in as blah, 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 and makes no sense at all unless I show it to you visually when I'm trying to teach you, because you learn visually. And then as you do that, then you start to be like, oh, you're learning again, great. So now we're off the plateau and jumping up again, right? And then you hit another phase where you're like, and this could be at any age. And you're like, okay, the learning has stopped or slowed down. What's going on now? And then that could be a stage where a parent could mistakenly think it's over.
Yeah.
It's over, he's never going to learn. And then I come in and I'm like, no. Let's look at his sleep. Let's look at his medical. Let's look at his environment. Let's look at the people around him. Is there someone giving clues where they shouldn't? Is there some environment that is causing him so much anxiety that he's no longer willing to learn? Are we overloading him? Is there just too much going on and not enough reinforcement? Is he not feeling well in his gut? Is he not sleeping? And these are all the things that are super, super, super important, because you could conclude that the child is stopping and this is where he's going to be forever, or you could look at yourself and you could figure out what you're doing wrong or what's missing. And until you do that, no matter what age, 5, 6, 13, whatever it is, and you do everything we so far know in science, and that's kind of one of the things for me is that I regret so many things we learned later that some of my children in the 80s would have benefited from, but we just didn't know, and as you learn and you get better, and there's still room for a lot of learning, but as a parent, you have to be open and you have to listen to everyone and you have to try different things and you have to see what works for your child. And until you do that, you can't make any conclusions about your child's abilities, because the one thing that is for certain with our kids on the spectrum is they learn differently. Their sensory input is different.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're talking about, which is, the sensory issues.
But this is why one of the many reasons why I love you is because you have such a sense of hope and listening to the individual.
Oh,
and,
for sure.
and that we as parents should not give up. So I love that. Hey, we're saying hello to Michael from Philadelphia, and Anna. Anna's asking a specific question about the difference between intellectual disability versus autism, and I think we'll get to that in a minute. But somebody has been waiting. They asked the first question. I want to make sure we get to their question. I have a question that my child jumps while pooping. He does not know how to squat. He is 4.5 years old. And she goes on to say that another problem he has, he bangs objects because of sensory issues. How can I resolve this banging issue?
So these are totally different things, and we can talk about them. One of the things I think that's very helpful to remember is that whenever you are trying to teach a specific behavior, a specific skill, focus on that one skill and not two skills at the same time. Things are harder when and you and I have talked about this a lot, Shannon. It's like, we see a problem arise in day-to-day life, and then we try to deal with it there.
Yeah.
And that's not the way to teach a skill. So for this child, you are trying to get him to be toilet trained, but part of that process, as you've been doing that, is he doesn't know how to squat. And I assume this question is from a part of the world, in the Middle East, for instance, there are countries where the toilet is actually like a hole in the ground, and you have to squat in order to go. So what I'm trying to tell you is don't try to fix the squatting behavior when it's time to go to the bathroom. Practice the squatting behavior on its own.
Yeah.
So not when he's going to the bathroom. Practice the squatting behavior. So perhaps not even at the toilet, but in different, like just in front of a mirror, or sit in front of him and hold his hands and squat, and give him a word for it, whatever that word may be in your language, where you're saying squat, and you push him down and you help him to squat.
Yeah.
Reward that, and then walk away. Keep doing that so that the behavior of squatting becomes a behavior he is not only familiar with, he knows the instruction for it, and he knows that when he does it, he gets rewarded.
Yeah.
Once you do that a few times, he will learn how to squat, and then you can actually use that command, squat, when you use the bathroom. So that's very important to separate those two things, because otherwise the whole experience of going to the bathroom can become aversive, because now you're trying to teach him a new concept. He might not know what he's doing. He might get confused about what he's doing wrong. You never want to do that.
Yeah.
So that's how you kind of deal with the squatting issue. The other thing was hitting
Banging.
banging, and I'm not sure what he is banging, but I will tell you that, we had a little child who used to bang things and would hold sticks and bang against things as a sensory item, and one of our therapists had the brilliant idea of putting a drum in front of him when he banged, and so he would then pick up a stick and bang it on the drum. And now he is an incredible drummer, and completely fully recovered, by the way. But we gave him a adaptive way to use that particular need. And, I'm not saying you want to allow the individual to bang all the time, but when you give the child an out, a time that is kind of limited but also allowed, and something that is adaptive and rewarding, then they will focus their need to bang something on that and won't need to do it all day long. So that's how you do it. You give the child maybe you can use a musical instrument. I'm not sure how he's banging, but maybe you can turn that into something that he's allowed to do a particular portion of the day or hour or whatever it might be. Then the rest of the time you take away that object and block it from happening. You always want to be fair.
Yeah, she says he bangs every object.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
you need to identify a specific object where he uses that, it's okay to bang. Anything else, no, you take it away. And so he will learn to discriminate, oh, when I have this particular drumstick, I can bang.
Yeah.
When I don't have this, I'm not allowed to bang and I need to do something else. And that's the other part of it, is keep him occupied with something else. This is called differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior, which means if he's banging like this, give his hands something to do that are incompatible with this motion, right? So for instance, drawing might be one, just sitting on his hands, putting his hands in his pocket, holding an object. There's lots of things that are incompatible with this.
I just watched a movie on Netflix. It's on Netflix right now called I Used to Be Famous. And it's, we reviewed it last week, and I gave it a bad review because I didn't think it was a great movie. Some of you loved it. I did say that there's a part of it that I love, that there's a boy who's actually autistic who was cast in the role of a boy who is autistic in the film, and he's a drummer, and he's a real drummer, and the kid is really drumming in the movie. It's a British movie, and the child is British. The child, he's a teenager, is British, and what's interesting is that he drums on everything. That he carries his drumsticks with him, and he drums on the bus seat. And he drums on, and the mom has set up a rack with pots, and he drums on those, and they take them into a concert with it. And it might be fun for you to watch to see that there's a possibility that that at some point this might be his strength. Like, isn't it funny when sometimes when we're like, oh, this is a problem, and it ends up being your child's superpower.
Absolutely.
So it might be fun for you to see that and see that it can be shaped into being something that is a superpower. And if
Definitely.
I think we're totally allowed to say the other drummer, because they can go and look him up on the internet, that we're aware of is Logan Shepherd. It's Logan Ellis Shepherd if you're looking for him. And watch him drum, and he is absolutely amazing.
Look him up on social media. He's brilliant.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
Chops is what I hear. Like professional drummers, they're like, oh, that kid has chops.
Yeah.
I saw him play once with the guitarist from Kiss, and he was like, that kid has chops.
Oh yeah,
right?
He's unbelievable. Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. I do want to make sure that I say hello, because I passed over. Was it Huma? There it is, Huma from Pakistan. Huma, so thrilled that you are here. Okay, I want to get to some of these questions. Okay, so maybe we should go back to Anna's question. Okay, what are some factors that indicate more on the intellectual disability versus autism? Because this is the big question that we all want to know too.
Yeah.
Because there are times, I remember one of the first questions that I asked was, how do I know, is it autism or is it MR was the term that they used at the time. Now we say intellectual disability. How will I know, what those things are? And I learned gradually over the years that there are some kids who have a dual diagnosis of both of those things.
Of course.
But it is not the majority.
No, it's not. And when I started in this field, which would be like 40 somewhat years ago, there was a misunderstanding, and actually it was in the diagnostic manual even, that something like 80% of children with autism have mental retardation, MR, which is now called intellectual disability. And I was always kind of frustrated by that, because the way that you measure MR or ID is through an IQ test, right? So typical IQ, most of us have an IQ of 100. And the way that is determined is we do a bunch of activities on a test. So like the test will ask you some, say 5 numbers forwards, repeat, they'll test your memory, say these numbers backwards, put these objects in the sequence they're supposed to be, whatever. There's like a series of activities, produce this like a matrix or things like that. And then based on each of those sections, you get a score, and then all of those are, the total of that is the measurement of your mental age. And the way, so then that'll be a specific score, and then they divide that by your chronological age, which is your normal age, and then they multiply that by 100. And so if your mental age and your chronological age are the same, then the quotient becomes 1.
Right.
Right? Multiplied by 100, your IQ is 100. And that's average IQ, intelligence quotient IQ. But there's a standard deviation, which means most people, when you do a normal curve of the population, are 15 points below or after that. So somewhere we are, most of us, 98% of us, or even higher than that, we're in the range of 85 to 115 IQ. Right. Okay. Now, why is there something wrong with that when it comes to autism? The reason is that those tests are loaded with verbal questions and instructions. So if I am to take, let's say if I come to you and I say, you know, put these, like for children, like some of the tests, IQ tests for children, and tests, by the way, vary. There's a test that's only for 2 to 6, there's a test that for younger than 2, there's a test that's 6 to 16, and so on and so forth, and tests are at different age ranges. But the instructions are always verbal. Right? Do this, put this over there, and do so on. Or what is this? They require verbal ability. So there's an immediate confound, which is that if you have a delay in language, then you shouldn't be tested this way, because your language ability is now interfering with your core intelligence, or our ability to see your core intelligence and to measure it, right? So it isn't fair how we're measuring your core intelligence. So for many, many years, I was just always fighting that and saying, no, this is not valid. This cannot be valid. Like, this is a brilliant child. Look at his memory. It's crazy. It's amazing what he's able to do, blah, blah, blah. But just because he doesn't have language, we're giving him a lower IQ. And so I would always recommend to parents who have children whose language is delayed to use tests of intelligence that are for deaf children. They're nonverbal tests of intelligence, and they're much more accurate. And I have had scenarios where a child would come in with an IQ of, let's say, 70, and then we would give the child an IQ test of a nonverbal type, and then all of a sudden their IQ was showing up as 90, you know? And that always gave me a thrill, because I'd be like, see, that's their actual intelligence that we're working with. Now, what is the difference? The difference is a lot. Like, there are certain behaviors with children with autism that just have absolutely nothing to do with IQ, and they're much more on the sensory area. This is what we were talking about. So there are children who, you know, a lot of the self-stimulatory behaviors are very specific to autism and don't really have much to do with intellectual disability. Intellectual disability really is just more about the ability to learn and model, imitate, and so on. And when you have a child who has intellectual disability, you see that. They're not hyper. Most of the time, children with ID are very much more lethargic and calm, and they're not interacting with their environment. You'll see children with autism interacting with their environment, maybe not the way you want them to interact with their environment, but they're very active with their toys or with their own things. And in fact, you can't even get them to calm down for a moment. So the symptoms are quite different. And if you look up, you can even look up kind of online, say DSM symptoms of autism, DSM-5 symptoms of autism, symptoms of intellectual disability, and then you will see that they're quite a different group of symptoms.
Okay. I'm going to go to a question that somebody sent in last night that has a little to do with this. My son is 4 years old. He's nonverbal, classified as intellectually disabled, and severely autistic. He is a very sweet little boy, and I love him very much. He needs a lot of special care and is emotionally and mentally more like a very young 2-year-old. He's 4 now.
Yeah.
He goes to an autistic specialized preschool and absolutely loves it. I am having some difficulty with recent behaviors, and the school isn't really helping with ideas. He likes scripting from YouTube videos, mostly nursery rhymes and songs with alphabets and numbers. The scripting in itself is not a problem. The main problem is that he does not control the volume of his voice at all. He will script literally nonstop day and night. Most children, when they wake up at night, become bored and go back to sleep, but he is perfectly happy to entertain himself for hours on end. Does anybody have any suggestions of how to help him understand that there are times that he cannot do these behaviors, at least he has to do them quietly? Given his limitations, simply requesting to be quiet does not work and only pauses his action for about 3 seconds. I am a single mom and I lack social support. I have also explored every resource in the area and there are not a ton. I am utilizing what is available, but I need more help. So that was 16 hours ago. I'm sending this mom a hug.
And I hope to God that you are watching or that you will watch this episode because this is super, super important.
Yeah.
So if you have a child who has a diagnosis of autism and someone gives you a secondary diagnosis of ID, intellectual disability, please have your child retested with a nonverbal test of intelligence. These are the Merrill-Palmer or the lighter R. These are the two tests, Merrill-Palmer or lighter R. It's important you do this. Why? Because when your child has a diagnosis of ID, most of the world will simply give up and say, he has intellectual disability. There's no point in trying to teach him this stuff. He's just going to learn a certain amount. It used to be the case, that used to be the case also with autism, but I think that has changed a little bit. The point I'm trying to make is that it is important that your child be given the opportunity to learn. And especially your child, because your child has potentially, possibly, will have some hyperlexia. Maybe, we don't know, but he's scripting numbers and letters. A lot of the kids that script numbers and letters are very strong when it comes to numbers and letters. And that shows up later in their intelligence, and it actually skews their intelligence high. So these are kids that later on become known as geniuses, which is very important for you right now, because not only is it important to know it so that no doors are closed for him. This is probably my biggest thing here. It's like, don't let them close doors on him. The other part of it is that you now know that he is someone who is potentially a visual learner. And he will learn these numbers. When my kids learn letters, they teach themselves how to read. That begins to teach them how to speak. It opens up a whole new world for them. And I don't want any hyperlexia. In fact, a lot of kids who have hyperlexia and are very focused on letters and so on do extremely well, as opposed to not doing well at all. Yeah. Now, the issue that you have here is pretty simple, actually. He's scripting. I'm saying, it's so funny when after you've seen thousands of kids over the years, when someone gives you a scenario, you immediately think of a child.
That's like that.
That's like that.
Yeah.
That's exactly like that. I had a child who was exactly like that and would script so loudly. I mean, it was unbelievable all the time. And it was all the, he was into numbers and letters, but he would count. Yeah. Every single possible thing. Like he would count stairs as he was going up and down them loudly, 1, 2, 3, 4. And let me tell you, after a while, it's unnerving, right? Because someone who's just repetitively doing that. And he was so into letters and stuff that he had this system where he had put letters into the universe, right? And so like if he counted X number of ceiling squares, he would also be able to establish letters into them. Kind of like, what was that thing we saw, the series that had the genius who used to play chess? Queen's Gambit.
Yeah.
Do you remember how she used to like look at the ceiling and so stuff like that?
Yeah.
I remember when I was watching that, I was like, oh my God, so many of our kids do this kind of stuff. They have the ability to hold visual information in space, you know? So what you are trying to do right now is just to teach him to do it quietly in his head. And this is it's a lesson we used to we had written, and we used to call it saying versus thinking. And it's difficult at first for a young child to learn this concept, but you have already started it, Because when you sit with him and you say quiet and he does it for 3 seconds, that's your baseline. That's where you're starting. And all you have to do now is shape that to be longer. And so you will sit with him and you'll say quiet, and you can do this in a multitude of different ways. You can either put a timer, and when the timer buzzes, you will say, good job, and now you can talk and reward and all this. Or you can count on your hands while he's quiet, but you will extend that period of time where he learns that quiet is something that goes on until you say, okay, we can talk now. And that is a really good thing. And later, when he gets a little bit more advanced, you can actually start, when he's quiet, by the way, it's not like he has stopped scripting. He can do it in his head. He's doing it in his head. In fact, the same child that I mentioned to you, years later had come to my house, because his parents actually became very good friends of mine, had come to my house, and he was so amazing, this child. He is so amazing right now. He's brilliant and doing extremely well. But it was so cute because he had learned that those, you know, the counting behavior wasn't something that was really acceptable. So he would like, oh, I want to see your backyard. Can I see your backyard? So I'm like, sure, let's go. So he'd go in the backyard and he'd walk along the pool and then walk to the back of the backyard and come back, and then he'd bring it into conversation. He'd say, do you know that your pool is exactly, you know, X feet long, and so on and so forth. And he would make it a normal conversation. But what he had done was he had counted as he was stepping.
Right.
And he had gotten so good at doing this in his head that he could also just converse with you, appear completely fine, yet he was thinking it. Which, by the way, is what we do. It's what every person does, right? If you think for a moment, it's very interesting exercise. When you're in your car, turn off the radio. And then all of a sudden, you'll recognize so many more thoughts that you are having. Whereas when your radio is on, you have these thoughts, but the conscious ones are just pertaining to what's going on music or radio. And so we have a lot of subconscious thoughts, and they can be scripting, they can be repetition of letters, it doesn't matter. The issue is if you can control it and not allow it to be so loud that it disturbs the environment. Yeah. And that's all. And that's sometimes the really important point with autism is that we have these sensory things going on, right? I mean, Shannon, you remember one of my older recovered kids who, by the way, I miss and should get in touch with and see how he's doing. You know, he was a biostatistician doing extremely well. One of the things he taught me was that when he was younger, the sounds that were much louder for him were things like the door opening and closing. And it was really hard for him to focus on language because he would count all those sounds that were, to us, background noise. And this is what, again, goes back to the sensory issues, right? We do the things that make our sensory modalities more feel regulated. And so, you know, the fact that he's counting or rotely repeating these things is not the issue, it's that he's doing it loudly. You just need to shape the behavior of doing it in your head.
Yes. But I think that a lot of our kids don't understand when you verbally say, you know, quiet, they don't understand what that is. We have to model that behavior.
And you can just sit, sit quietly.
And one of the, you know, for my son, one of the greatest things anybody ever gave us, they took a piece of pipe and it had an elbow, and they would have him speak into it so that he could hear his own voice, because it just goes from one to the other. And then they would have him practice, okay, do it louder so he could hear what it was, and do it softer, and do it very quiet and whisper, but he could actually hear himself. It never occurred to me that he couldn't hear himself and he didn't know what those words meant.
Absolutely, and sometimes we actually even will record something and play it soft, play it loud so that the child understands. And I practice. We have another lesson which is all about soft, louder, 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 so that the child realizes they can control
Yes.
the volume as well.
Yes, amazing. And I'm starting to freak because we've only gotten through some questions, but we have more time. If you're just tuning in, we're staying live for 2 hours. And the second hour, we're going to podcast the first hour this week, but the second hour we'll podcast. They did ask for you to repeat the name of the
tests?
The tests, yes.
Merrill Palmer, I believe it's MERRILPALMER, Merrill Palmer, or Lighter R, which is LEITERR, which stands for revised.
Okay, and then Erica, I'm just going to say, I feel like I missed part of your questions. Sometimes we don't get all of the questions, or I get some of them and you get some of them, but I feel like I've dropped in the middle of the conversation, so forgive me, because it starts, he loves cords and shoelaces. He's gone through so many shoelaces that I've had to buy so many because he pulls on them or pulls them on his mouth. I don't know what to do. He reaches everywhere I put them. He's been acting up a lot, hitting me and throwing himself on the floor, or he bangs his head in the door or on me. And then I think there's more further down, but maybe not.
Yeah, and I need to, if you could, Erica, explain to us a little bit more about when you say he pulls on them. Like, can you give him, let's say, a shoelace or some version of a shoelace, which is something that is just his? And is it possible for him to, whenever he has this need, to pull on something, that he kind of takes it out of his pocket and he just like plays with it for a little bit and puts it back? If you could explain to us kind of how he does that. Now, putting stuff in his mouth is a very different behavior. Like, this is what I mean. Like, we always have to separate the topographies of behavior. And like, you know, we definitely don't want to allow him to put it in his mouth, but we do want to allow him to functionally use that in some ways if that's something that he needs. I mean, you know, I come, because I'm from the Middle East, I immediately think of beads, you know, that men hold in their hands and they play with all the time. So I am just wondering if you can describe this behavior, whether we can find something functional, adaptive, that would be acceptable and that would help him contain it to a certain period of the day or a certain amount of time during his activities.
She clarified he takes his shoes off, or when he has his shoes, he just loves to pull on the laces and chew them, or plays with the cords and laces with his hands.
Okay, so that's a different issue, right? So I suggest that you try this, which is give him a shoelace, which is not on his shoes. And I also recommend that maybe for a little while you buy him Velcro shoes, so that it's a clear distinction for him that he's not gonna, he needs to forget about going down to his shoes. You do not want to allow him, obviously, to put those in his mouth. So you just stop him. That's called blocking. And you reward periods of time that he goes without putting those in his mouth or pulling them. Now, meanwhile, if he has some item, he could have like a toy shoe or something that has he's playing with it in his hands as opposed to his own shoes, and then he is compliant with regards to putting it away, that's totally fine at this point.
There you go. There you go. Okay, we've got so many questions coming in, and I have more below. Really quickly, does speech impairment caused by HPA a permanent condition? I don't know what that is.
I think you're referring to a medical condition. Maybe you can write back in and explain to us.
What
so that we can talk about,
HPA is.
So we can talk about it a little bit more.
Jennifer has written in and said that she's asked for accommodations at the school without result, and without the diagnosis of deaf, they will not accommodate. But I think, sometimes school can be so, like, I used to work in the public school system, and sometimes they mire themselves in their own paperwork, and I think it's mostly fear, you guys. But when you say ask for accommodation, you're saying get it privately, not through the school, right? Or you can ask the school, but they may not do it. To have the test, an IQ test administered to nonverbal people.
Yeah, you might not No, well, first of all, a lot of schools are not allowed to do school IQ testing. That was part of the law.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that you should be going to your school anywhere, Jennifer. I don't know what state you're in, but I would recommend that you get a private IQ test done, definitely, and then take that to the school so that they are aware of his intelligence.
Okay, and then she went on to say, what about sensory processing, nonverbal autism, ID and ADHD unattentive? Any suggestions? I think we would need to be, do we need more specificity?
Well, we need more time to talk about that, that's for sure.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, because we're talking about now intellectual disability as well as nonverbal autism, as well as ADHD, the unattentive type. So that's a lot going on there.
We're at the hour, so I think we're going to pause for just a second and say, for those of you who are watching this podcast recorded, there will be an addition to this that will be dropping next week. For everybody who's watching live, stay tuned. But I do want to thank those of you who were with us during this hour and watched the show live, and tell you to make sure that you're watching later this week, because on Thursday we are having the Let's Talk Autism with Shannon and Nancy Halloween show. If you've tuned in throughout the years, Nancy and I always wear costumes, and sometimes it's highly successful and sometimes it's not. I can't even begin to tell you what this year will be, because, you know, it's a secret. I could tell you, but then bad things would happen. I would be chastised completely for that. Anyway, also want to let people know that if you are in the Los Angeles area, there aren't very many tickets left, but there are a couple of tickets.
If there are, yeah.
I'm not sure that there are tickets, I should say that. But there's a very important event that's happening this Saturday. That's the All Ghouls Gala. It is the first ever All Ghouls Gala, and it's a really a good time. I'm not sure that there are tickets, but you could look and see.
Please check, yeah,
and
because
see.
we have, I think we are past our capacity, but maybe not. I don't know. Please check. And, and again, if you, also, even if you can't purchase a ticket, feel free to donate. We are
absolutely.
You know, the event is to benefit ACT, Autism Care Today, and Autism Care Today funds all sorts of things for families: safety equipment, communication devices, sensory equipment, co-pays, all kinds of stuff. Any kind of support you can give us, we appreciate.
Okay, so we're going to thank you for joining us. We're going to go to a commercial for the All Ghouls Gala, and then we're going to be right back to continue with hour 2, so stick with us.
You are invited to a frightfully fun evening at the first annual All Ghouls Gala. Eat, drink, and be scary at an exclusive venue in Woodland Hills, California on Saturday, October 29th, 2022. Join us if you dare from 6 p.m. until death do us party. Dressed to kill. Devilish prizes will be awarded during a spooktacular costume contest. Tickets to this exclusive event are available now at Eventbrite. But they won't last long. Will you? Proceeds from the event benefit Autism Care Today. So get your scare on.
Welcome back. We are in the second hour of Ask Dr. Doreen. For those of you who are just tuning in, maybe you're watching this in podcast, there was a part 1, and this is the second part of this special edition. So Traven, I assume that we're going to roll that opener again. It's time for Ask Dr. Doreen. Maybe not.
The advice and opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh is the
Dr. Doreen is an expert in autism.
Doreen Granpeesheh.
Dr. Granpeesheh.
Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh.
Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh is a visionary in the field of autism. Now you can ask her questions on Ask Dr. Doreen.
Welcome back to Ask Dr. Doreen. I'm Shannon Penrod, and I'm here with Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh. This is part 2 for those of you who are watching live, or just part 2 if you're watching us on podcast, of a very special edition of Ask Dr. Doreen. Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh, who's a true expert in the field of autism, is here with us. She's answering your questions live, and you can be writing in right now. Excuse me. And I'm going to have a coughing fit. But before I do that, we left off with a question. Excuse me. What about sensory processing, nonverbal autism ID and ADHD unattentive? Any suggestions?
Yeah. So I'll talk about that while you
maybe
have a drink.
Mute my microphone.
So, all of these are a little bit different from each other and also have some similarities. So we're talking about ID, which is intellectual disability, which in the old days used to be called mental retardation, which essentially is just a kind of man-made measure of our intelligence, which again has to do with how we imitate from the environment and how we learn. Autism, which of course is its own thing and is a huge spectrum and has multiple different areas of that are affected, and then we're talking about ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and very specifically we're talking about the inattentive type, because with ADHD you also can have other types of that are hyperactive type, which is also its own thing, and you can also have ADHD combined, which is inattentive and hyperactive. And so, it's difficult sometimes to differentiate between inattentive form of ADHD and autism. And in the past, it used to not be allowed to actually diagnose both of those things at the same time. But it is now allowed to diagnose those, and the way to, I think it's important to look at the very specific diagnostic criteria for each one. When I look at a child who has just ADHD, even if it's inattentive type, we have, hyperactive type is easier because you have a child who's literally climbing the walls and running around and extremely hyperactive. But when you're looking at inattentive type, the difference is that it's actually interesting. Thank you for raising it today, because I think the difference in inattentive ADHD as opposed to autism has something to do with the sensory input. And I'll talk about that a little bit, because I think children who have ADHD and attentive are kind of, their language ability is pretty average. Their ability to, if you sit them down and instruct them to, take a look at your eyes, your nose, your mouth, your whatever, they are kind of able to do it. It's just very difficult for them to do it because they get distracted by other stimuli, right? Whereas children with ASD, what you're seeing in the lack of attention is a little bit different. It's almost like they start out with a much more severe inability to pay attention and focus. And sometimes to me, it appears like they just don't have the sensory ability to do that. A lot of our kids on the spectrum have a hard time focusing, let's say, on your eyes, like just look at me. And no matter how hard they try, they can't. They're looking at the air in front of you. They're not able to focus both of their eyes, it's called binocularity, on your face. They will have issues and they'll be fleeting eye contact. And that's not the same as what you see with a child who just has ADHD. It's a little bit, it's quite different actually. A child with ADHD has a lot of other skills are intact. Their only issue is just being distracted. And the main thing with a child with ASD is that their other skills are not intact. They have a really hard time paying attention because they're not understanding language. Multiple sensory things in the environment will affect their ability to pay attention. And it's I think, in my opinion, it's a more severe disability in that sense.
Well, NH wrote in and says, my 5-year-old son has few physical stims. He has some vocal ones, but he also often zones out, sometimes whispering, and won't respond at all for a while. When we ask, he says he's thinking about X or Y, often a very special interest. Is this the equivalent of a mental stim?
Yeah, and it's totally fine as long as, so it's interesting. This is a great question because one of the things that our children sometimes have a hard time with is what's called set shifting.
Yeah.
So, and set shifting is the ability to switch a cognitive process on and off, or to switch from one to the other. And so I'll give you an example. Like I might, just for a moment, as we're doing the show even, my phone might light up and I'll see my daughter's name on there or something. So my brain activity will immediately go to what does Charlie need, right? Mm-hmm. And it'll just be a moment. And then I will set shift back to the questions that are popping up on my iPad, and I will be able to refocus myself pretty fast, right? Yeah. And I still have in the background of my head, in my mind, I need to address Charlie's needs, right? But it's now shifted to the background. And with our kids, you'll notice that sometimes when they're even when they're focused on TV, let's say, mm-hmm. and you call them, and this is not even just kids on the spectrum, this also happens a lot with teenagers and so on, and you'll call their name and they're just zoned out, right? They're just doing something else and it's almost like they don't hear you even. Yeah. And you get them to learn, right? Either by shouting at them or they will lose an opportunity and then they'll learn whatever it is, but or you get in their face and you visually just get them back. And over time, we learn. It's one of those things that as adults, we shape ourselves. We learn how to set shift rapidly. And if your child was able to set shift, they would know that they can leave that thought behind and pay attention to your stimulus, whatever that might be, more rapidly. You can do exercises for this. So, you can do simple exercises, which are just, have the child engaged in an activity and then have a bell go off or call their name or just practice that activity. Another really good, there are several tests that we do for set shifting. One of them is you just take a piece of paper and you write, it depends on the child's abilities, right? And you write
I would fail this.
So, you get better at it. You get better at it. So what you do is you write A, B, C, D, all over the page, right? Or on a big board, different places. And then you also put numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. You can do that, or you could do, you can do different types of stimuli, but that's the test, the basics test. And then what you tell the child to do is to go from A to 1 to B to 2 to 3 to C. If you understand what I'm saying, is you're forcing them to set shift between alphabet and numbers and progressively expand, right? And that's a hard activity, but the child gets better at it. Another type of activity that involves set shifting is where you write the name of a color, but in a different color. So for instance, you will write blue in blue first, and then green in green, but then eventually you will write like blue, but using the color green. And when you and then you will give the instruction to the child, read blue, or tell me the color, show me the color blue, or tell me all the things that are blue. And it's confusing in the beginning, but honestly, you'll see that over time, you just get really, really better at it. And it becomes really hard when you tell someone to read, and what they're actually seeing is a different, you're telling them to read blue, and it says BLUE, but it says it in red.
Yeah.
And people get very, very confused with that. But over time, your brain just becomes really good at focusing on one cognitive set.
Yeah.
And that helps this issue.
They have all those apps that are like brain games.
Oh, yeah,
That
yeah.
that have exactly
sure they
that
have
to work
those.
on that, and they recommend it for people of a certain age, you know, to help keep mental acuity and things like that. I've never been good at set shifting. I'm much better at it than I was when I was younger.
Yeah.
But you know, one of the things in my marriage is that, you know, I said that I loved my husband and that, you know, he's amazing because my husband, like a lot of men, he works in the field of video games and he plays them. And I said, you know, I could be married to him forever because if he could be playing a video game and I could walk in the room and say, hey, and he immediately puts it down and is attentive to me, which is amazing. Most men, that is not the thing. And I always praise him for that, right? I cannot do the same. If I'm sitting and typing and he'll come and say hi and I'm typing and I, you know, and he says, hi, baby. And finally I'm like, can you not see that I am writing? I cannot talk to you and write at the same, and I'm angry because my brain had to leave one thing to another to say hello, and now I lost my train of thought. And I like say, you know, I don't want to talk to you now. Leave me alone. And I get angry when my brain has to shift from one side to the other when I'm entrenched in the thing. So I just want to speak up for all the kids that are like creative and doing that, and to say to the parents, have an awareness of the fact that when you're asking them to shift, we have to make it worth their while, right?
100%, and thank you very much for saying that, because it is hard to set shift. And that's, you used exactly the language, which is, you made me lose my train of thought. That's exactly what it is. And so, yes, you need to make it worth their while. You need to reward always for these types of activities. These are not easy. You know, mental games, teaching your brain to become more fluid, more flexible. This is part of flexibility, by the way, training, is super important, but it isn't easy. It's definitely
not easy, but possible to learn and get better. And I am better than I used to be. Jennifer's written in something really interesting. She said, my son is screen obsessed. I think a lot of people can relate to that, right? He plays things over and over and likes to choreograph 2 devices. I'm not sure this part, but she says his aggression comes out with removal. I think we can all relate to that too, that he lacks fine motor, so computer stuff he can't grasp. So I think we're really talking about like iPads, I think. And that he is someone who refuses to leave home and has been diagnosed with social anxiety. Now, we don't have an age, Jennifer. If you want to write in and tell us how old he is, that might be useful.
But let's talk about this, Jennifer, because there's 2 different issues here, and they're both important. So we start with, he has a tantrum. He has aggression when you take the device away. And I know this is scary, and as Shannon said, depending on his age, it's probably even more scary if he's older. But you must work towards actually removing this object. And, you know, the second part of your question kind of says why you must. Because his world will narrow and be focused only on the device if you allow it. Already, I'm concerned that he's not leaving the house, and we can talk about that in a minute separately. But I do want to say that whenever there is a behavior that you know, the child has a tantrum or aggression or anything like that because you're taking away a device, essentially he has trained you to not take away the device because you will be punished by his aggression if you do. So he's taught you to leave him alone, which is not okay, because society will not allow him, as he ages, to just spend all of his life on a device. So you should get help. You should get people, whether they are, you know, hopefully you can find someone who's a board-certified behavior analyst who's able to come in and help you. What they will do is a functional behavior assessment, which essentially says, they will do a bunch of experiments and ask you a lot of questions, and they will come to the conclusion that he is tantruming or having aggressive behavior because he wants to avoid giving up his object, which is the device, right? And that is not okay, and they will teach you techniques such as, for instance, taking away the object, allowing him to have his tantrum while there is enough support that you can contain the aggression. That's why I want you to have support first. Because often when we don't reward what you're doing when you give it back, because he tantrums, aggresses, and you give him back the device, is he's being rewarded for the aggression. He's, in his system, he's realizing, wow, that really worked. I aggressed, they gave me back the object I wanted, this is great, from now on, I win. From now on, what I'm gonna do is whenever they take something away that I don't want them to take away, I will hit, and I'll get it back. It just has happened. There's no blame in this. I'm not blaming you in any way. This just has happened over time, and it happens frequently with our kids. The issue is now we have to teach him the opposite of that, which is that if you aggress, you're not getting back this object. But if you ask nicely, you might get it back depending on what time of the day it is or how much you've already had it. So essentially the way that it works is that it starts with taking the object away and allowing the individual to have a massive aggressive or tantrum fit without aggressing. That's why you need multiple people there to protect and to make sure that you are safe, he is safe. The aggression will increase, that's called an extinction burst, and it will decrease because he will realize this is not effective anymore. And once he realizes that, you can actually have him come and say, I'm calm, I want the device again, and then you can allow it for a short period of time. It's all about being fair, so it's really all about moderating and making sure that our kids have the things that are meaningful to them, but not when it interferes with the rest of their lives. My kids and Shannon's kid, I don't know if he still does, but my child still, who is 23 years old now, still loves to play games on a computer, video games, but he will do it literally like from 10 to 11 o'clock at night, and that's it, right? It doesn't interfere with his day. There's no way he would be doing that during the day. It's just his recreational activity, and he gives it a specific amount of time. If he was doing it during the day, I would be on his case because he wouldn't be going to work or school or all the other things that he has to do or leaving the house, right? I mean, these things can become so dominating that we will do nothing else but this. That's when it becomes an addiction. It's like everything else that we do beyond control, and it needs to be controlled. So, yeah.
I was just going to say that I think in our case, one of the things that I've discovered is if nothing else is going on, my kid,
can do it,
if he has
right.
2 weeks off, he will spend the entire 2 weeks doing the computer unless somebody interrupts that for him and offers him something that is equally or more exciting.
Yes, of course.
And that's really been the trip. And I can remember when he was younger and we were really addicted to the iPad that, sometimes it took like a day of going to Disneyland, because we live close to Disneyland, where we say, oh, we're going to Disneyland.
Yes.
And oopsie, we forgot to bring the iPad in the car. So you're just going to have to sing and do other things in the car on the way down. And he knew that he was going to Disneyland, so he got through it. I think, I'm on his case all the time about it, but I want to say that for me, the being on his case doesn't work. But when he has other things that are more exciting. Now, for somebody who's already saying, I don't want to go home because I have social anxiety, and I've admitted before on the show that I had a bout with agoraphobia and had to be treated in cognitive behavioral therapy to be able to leave the house again. I couldn't leave home, for a period of time. And the only time I would leave was to come to clinic because I had to.
Yes.
Because my child's well-being was dependent upon that, right?
Right.
But I think that having gone through the cognitive behavioral for it, it's all about, what do you want? And being, you've talked before about systematic desensitization.
Yes.
And they helped me to work through a process to be able to go out the house, and be 10 feet outside the house and then be, in the car and go someplace. But it really was tied to things that I wanted to do or felt like I needed to do because as a parent. And this sort of dovetails into that a parent has written in and said that their son's sensory issues is around the happy birthday song. And that they don't know why that's the case, but when they're in a restaurant and if somebody starts singing it in a restaurant, he will repeatedly say, damn it, and say, no, 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 every time, and that please help with that. But it's kind of, they're both very different. One, I don't want to go outside of the house, and the other, when this thing happens. But I would assume that cognitive behavioral therapy would be a path for both of those things, yes?
Yeah, or just behavioral therapy, depending on the age and functioning of the child. So, and they could have been, those two things could be related or not. In other
words, these are two different kids, by the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But like, for instance, the whole concept of, social anxiety. Let's talk about social anxiety for a minute. But the concept of social anxiety could have been initiated by a sensory overload.
Yeah.
So like you become socially anxious for many different reasons, many different reasons. And sometimes I have children who have autism, and they have also been given a diagnosis of social anxiety. And I usually am not necessarily in agreement with that. It depends. Sometimes I am. I have had adults who have both diagnoses for sure. But the issue is that with autism, it is pervasive, and it's broader than social anxiety. Social anxiety is kind of a pretty, I want to say, nuanced type of diagnosis. You get social anxiety because it has to do with anxiety around people, because somehow you feel that those people are judging you in a way that will make you feel worse about yourself. Social anxiety is very connected to performance anxiety. It has to do with, I think I'm going to fail and be judged by society. Now, just think about what I just said. That's a very high-level thing, right? It's an extremely high-level thing to be able to think in second or third level theory of mind. I am worried about what other people will think about me. That's an intense perspective-taking skill. A lot of our kids don't have that level of perspective-taking. They just have not yet developed it. And you know this because at an earlier age, sometimes they don't have embarrassment about certain things. So to say that they have social anxiety is not necessarily the case. Now, they may have anxiety about environmental stimuli. For instance, the sound of human voices, the sound of a buzzer, the sound of an elevator, the sound of street cars. And that is set, absolutely, I've seen that 100 times with my kids, where like there's something in the environment that doesn't bother us, so we don't even recognize it, and it is excruciatingly painful for the child, and therefore he starts to self-isolate and not want to deal with that, right? In this particular child where we're talking about, he stays at home all the time, he doesn't want to leave. I mean, part of that is because home is where the device is, right? And it's comfortable, and he sits there and so on. And I guarantee you, when you go out, he gets less of the device and probably a little bit more of stuff that is uncomfortable for him.
And unpredictable.
And unpredictable, absolutely. But whatever the cause may be, and it could be cognitive behavior therapy exercises, or it could be just behavioral exercises like systematic desensitization, where you gradually shape your own behavior or the child's behavior by progressively getting the child acclimated to those situations that are harmful or difficult for the child. So, let's just step outside for 2 seconds, and great, we're going to reward you and bring you back in, or let's do it now for 5 seconds, let's do it now for 30 seconds, and so on and so forth. Or it could be with systematic desensitization, you go outside and then you pair that with relaxation or thoughts of things that are calming so that you gradually can tolerate more and more of the thing that is bothering you, whatever it may be, a phobia or a sound or a social anxiety, whatever it may be. But it is important to deal with it, is what I'm trying to say. I cannot tell you the number of people that I have met who had agoraphobia, which is really the anxiety of going outside your home. Yeah. And it's debilitating.
Oh, yeah.
It is, it's not a good life. You do not want that life because your anxieties become higher and higher the more you spend time in the home. It's a really bad cycle, and you start to just feel more and more anxious, and then gradually you develop obsessive compulsive behaviors in the home, and it just becomes debilitating. So, you know, wherever you are, if you're not able to be a part of society, you need ways to start practicing that so that you can get there.
But it's, I think, you know, having something worthwhile, really worthwhile to leave the house.
It's all about reward and reinforcers.
And in terms of the happy birthday, I do want to acknowledge that they said that the dad, who is now deceased, would spank the individual for saying the no, no, no around the birthday song being being played in a restaurant. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but I do want to say that, you know, I think most people are trying to do the best that they can, but there's been a great deal of stuff that's been misunderstood over the years.
Yes.
And that when in my era, if somebody behaved in a way that was not what was expected, we got spanked. In my family, we got spanked. I love the phrase that Maya Angelou always would say is that when we knew better, we did better, right? And I hope that people that are watching this show acknowledge that now we know that when somebody is having a sensory reaction to something, that we would not do any kind of a thing that would be add on to the stress of that.
Yes.
But if somebody didn't know that at a time and a place, then, you know, I think that's sad, and that's unfortunate for that individual, because they have to deal with the repercussions of that, knowing that they were hit as a result of that. And I would rather focus my attention on helping that individual than the recriminations of the person in the past, because I'm sure that they meant well.
Yep.
I got spanked, and I know that my mother loved me and my dad loved me, but that was what they thought was acceptable.
Yep.
And it wasn't helpful when I got spanked, but spanking someone for having a reaction to a sensory thing, I believe, is not helpful.
Absolutely. I mean, spanking in general is not a good solution.
Right.
And we know this now. And we know that when you do any kind of punitive type of behavior, it doesn't really have an effect for long term. It just, instead it produces this type of traumatic result. Now, it is possible that, you know, again, it goes back to kind of not knowing. You know how a lot of children, when they're very young, you take them to the mall and they will go and you're trying to do something very good and you take them to Santa, right? Oh, yeah. And they will scream and cry and they're terrified. And you have no idea why. And you wonder, is it the look of this old man? Is it just the fact that they're sitting on the lap of a creepy old guy they don't know? Is it his beard? Is it the sound? Is it the
smell? Sometimes the costume doesn't smell good.
What is it? But it is terrifying for the child, right? Now, we don't force our kids. We just keep taking them back. And eventually our kids look around and they see other kids. That's a very big part of it. And they realize, oh, this is supposed to be something fun. It's still scary. Yeah. But when our child finally realizes that the toy I tell this guy is what I'm going to get, then it becomes a fun thing. Right. And they overcome it, right? And so it's interesting that we replace that fear with that reinforcer, which is like this scary dude is actually a means for me to get the thing I want, right? But so with the individual who might be afraid of happy birthday song, let's say, it's really important to look back and say, and by the way, I want to say a lot of times our kids as adults can actually explain to us what is causing that trauma. They can go back and tell you what is the fearful stimulus in there. And it's
And this
important.
individual is 25 now.
And if this individual can talk about it, I would just ask and say, what is it that's causing you? And I would give the individual, and this is really key, I think, with individuals on the spectrum, when you get to a point where you are functioning very well in society and there are certain things that bother you, then you can decide as well, and you can take control over the situation. And as Shannon said earlier, she said, I had developed this fear of leaving my house, and I would only come to the clinic when I had to, and then I forced myself gradually with the help of cognitive behavioral therapy, and I got over it. Okay. And what's the difference there? The difference is she made a conscious decision to get help and to improve upon a thing that was causing some level of disability for her, and she did it. Okay. We do this in our own lives all the time, you guys. We do diets. We make a decision that I want to lose a certain amount of weight, and then we adhere to very strict rules about it. We do exercise. We make a conscious decision that we want to improve a certain portion of our lives. I want to remind myself how to be fluent in French again. I force myself to take classes, etc. Right?
Right.
So this individual, if they are able to, can talk about what caused it, this trauma to begin with, and they can take control. And the reason I want to talk about this is that a lot of times having control is the issue. When someone suddenly bursts out and starts singing behind you, that you don't have control over that. That in itself could be the traumatic event. Yeah. So ask the individual, is it the sound that's bothering you? Is it the fire? Is it the fact that everybody loudly claps? Are you afraid of what will happen with the cake? What is it about? Is it perhaps the fact that you have no control over this loud thing? What is it? And then let's help you cope with that, because we don't always have control, right? And sometimes we need to be able to just do other things that help us cope with it.
Yeah. What do you think about, because we've had people on before talking about recording noises. Like, I remember there was a kiddo who...
We used to do this all the time.
Right.
Like record the sound.
Yeah.
And then give the individual the ability to play it and get acclimated to it. 100%. That's one way to go. But it depends, again, like what is the stimulus that is causing, and particularly with an individual who can probably quite elaborately articulate, it would be very interesting to know.
Absolutely. I love that. Anita says, hi, doctor. I'm Anita, and they are a speech and language pathologist. Special ed. How can I help a 3.5-year-old to ask for help for the washroom in the classroom because the student soils often during the activity? So how would you teach them to ask for help? So
it's interesting because when I read the question, how do I teach someone to ask for help? In my mind, it's an immediate different path than asking to go to the bathroom. To me, there's two paths, and I'll explain a little bit more. Asking to go to the bathroom, I would start with a schedule. This child needs to be on a schedule and therefore taken to the bathroom on a schedule, and you have to identify the baseline of the schedule because you have to time and write a diary on when they soil themselves. It's either after a certain meal, after a certain period of time, after a certain activity, whatever it might be. But once you have done that for a few days, you'll be able to identify a baseline, which essentially means, they need to go every hour, every 2 hours, every 30 minutes, every 15 minutes. It depends on the child and the age and the time of day and all of that sort of stuff. Once you've established that, I would start to take the child to the washroom on that schedule at the baseline. But before going, you will have the child say bathroom. Just have them imitate bathroom or some word that is appropriate. Washroom. Oh, did they say washroom? Canadian.
Yes.
I love that. I know that because my husband is Canadian.
Oh, funny.
So you will basically then say washroom, and then you will take the child, and now you will gradually try, very, very slowly, try to increase that period of time. So if it's 15 minutes, you'll try for 20. You want to go slowly, because if the child has an accident, you need to back up again, right? And over time, as you get close to the child and it's that time to go, you just go like this. You could prompt it with a visual. We actually have, a lot of times what we do is we'll have a sign on the child's table, and we'll point to it. The child will say washroom, and then you'll go. And gradually the child will realize that saying washroom precedes going, and then they will void, and then you will really reward it, because that's very important too, is that when they go to the bathroom, you reward it heavily, right? And you keep them on a schedule like that. Now, asking for help, I would teach a little bit differently. I would actually, the way that we start that, because you can ask for help for a multitude of things, right? And so one of the ways that we start that is to have like a jar that is very, very difficult to open, like a pill box that is childproof. And you have things in there that the child wants. For instance, there are big jars that are meant for this, and the child can't open it, and then you will sit with the child and prompt them to give it to you and say, help. And then you will open it for the child, and then the child realizes, whoa, this is a very powerful word. When I say help, they come to my rescue. They give me this item that I wanted. There's so many other things that a child might need help for. For instance, an object that is out of reach, or there's so many different things. And then that label of help will be something that you can prompt the child to say every time for those different scenarios, but there's going to be a lot of them. And also remember, you can always use visual stimuli, like for instance, a board that has the word help on it, right? I mean, using a picture exchange system is very helpful when you have words that have multiple use, like help. So.
I want to get to Suyan's question because they've written in many times. Hi, I'm Suyan. My 3-year-old son had severe vocal stimming, did it every 5 minutes, and it suddenly disappeared. After 2 months of severe vocal stimming, his pronunciation was getting so bad. Do vocal stimming, is it related to language skills? Could I explain my son's vocal stimming as the regression? Do you have any ideas why it disappeared suddenly? And thank you. My first question is, did other language skills go away when they stopped vocal stimming?
Or did other language skills increase?
Exactly.
And my other question is, have you had his hearing checked? Because a lot of times vocal stimming is something that we do in order to hear it. And so I would want to make sure he doesn't have an ear infection or something else with his hearing. But it's very unusual for vocal stimming to suddenly disappear and not be replaced, or as Shannon said, for it not to be a full regression of other skills.
So, Suyan, can you write in and tell us the answer to those questions? While we're waiting, Dozer has said, my son has been licking the bottom of his feet and his arms. He has severe oral aversion and does not eat by mouth, so I'm not sure what to do.
Yeah, so I would really, so feeding therapy is a big, big part of what we do in ABA. And there are people who are specific feeding specialists. And I think it's really, really important for a million different reasons. Also, it'll affect language if you don't fix this. So I would suggest that you try to find someone who's a feeding specialist and really start to work on, I mean, a speech therapist, by the way, a lot of speech paths have this expertise as well. But you need to start teaching your child that licking of hands and feet is not allowed, but licking of other objects, for instance, a lollipop, is allowed. And with that, once you start replacing it with appropriate licking, then you will work on feeding, which will increase the items that he eats. And you will also be working on movement of the tongue. so that it'll start to influence the vocalizations that he is able to make, and that will eventually lead to speech. So it is super important that he uses his tongue for appropriate activities. I would also start using a vibrating toothbrush, anything that can allow him to activate inside the mouth, so that he actually will have less of an oral aversion. And, you know, the licking of things is exploratory. If you think of babies, they put everything in their mouth, right? They're exploring. I don't want him to get used to exploring the wrong things. But so you need to stop the foot and the mouth, the hand, but you need to give him other things that he can start to lick, like his toothbrush, his, you know, a lollipop, and you also need to give him other things that he can do with his mouth, such as blowing and putting his tongue out and moving it around and those types of things, because that will increase his food intake and it will increase his speech.
There we go. Want to say, oh, and by the way, I met a great feeding specialist when I was just in Seattle that I'm going to have on the show in the coming weeks. And if you would like to be connected before that, you can write directly to me, Shannon at autism-live.com. Love to have another feeding specialist in my Rolodex. Matt has written in and said, how may I help a teenage boy increase his voice volume if he is sensitive to loud noises? Thank you. I just was at a thing recently, and I have to be careful what I say, but there's a whole episode on Seinfeld about low talkers, about people who just, you know, when they talk, they talk. And I was at a thing, and there was somebody that I really wanted to hear what they were saying, and every time I would ask them a question, they would, and I would say, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit deaf, can you speak up? And I never heard a single word that they said. And I was mortified, because like when they would contribute to the conversation, I would just kind of look around at other people like, are you hearing? Because I'm not hearing. And you know, and we seem to have this on the spectrum. You know, sometimes our kids are talking too loud and sometimes they're talking too soft. I just wanted to point out that it's not just people on the spectrum. There's a whole episode of Seinfeld about this.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It's very funny. So what do you recommend?
So first of all, the fact that he's sensitive to noises doesn't necessarily mean that he's sensitive to the sound of language. So I wouldn't classify it together. What I would do is I would do some of the exercises that Shannon was referring to earlier, record him when he is talking, and then have him, you know, show him on the recorder how you can make it louder, softer, etc. And then actually tell him, like, can you try to do it louder so that we can hear it? Like, one of the things we do for loud is, you know, you're in the other room and you'll ask a question and the child has to respond, and you'll just be saying, I can't hear you, I can't hear you, and he will respond. Now, if he is extremely sensitive to the sound of his own voice, then that is an issue. And, you know, he will just be a more soft-spoken person. But I think it's important, the message that you're trying to get across is that if he has things he wants, and you will, you know, be in his presence and he'll ask for something and you'll give it to him because you heard it. But if he wants an item and you're in the other room and you can't hear it, he won't get the item. And that will give him the message that he must be louder. For instance, he may also want to go outside and you won't hear it. So you need to be pretending that you don't hear his requests. And you can either say, oh, I couldn't hear that, just like Shannon said, or you can just do a sign, but he will learn how to increase his sound, his voice, because he needs or wants that object. That's kind of an, you know, with manding, it's an internal, it's a built-in reinforcer, right? You're requesting something.
Marianne wants to know, does hug therapy help with kids with ADD and ODD help regulate their emotions when they're frustrated and angry?
Oh, this is a tough one. So, you know, hugging a child, there's something to be said for the sensory input that the child receives, but it is extremely dangerous when you hug a child who has, let's say, oppositional defiant disorder, ODD, Because what you will be doing is very likely hugging them, which is usually classified as a reinforcer, when they do something bad. I mean, it's just that simple. So when an individual has any kind of challenging behavior, hugging them is probably not the right thing to do at that moment.
Because it will just increase them wanting to do that more often. They'll learn, oh, if I throw things, I get a hug, and I want a hug, so I'm going to throw things. And
Depending on whether or not the hug is pleasant for them.
Okay.
Exactly.
Got it.
So if the
An
child,
important point.
If the child, I mean, reinforcers in ABA are defined not as whether or not they're pleasant, but they're defined as whether or not they increase the behavior that just preceded them. Because something might be very reinforcing to me, like a hug, but might be aversive to you,
True.
which is you don't like being hugged. So just be careful, because when you do anything that is reinforcing, you're going to increase the behavior. So if a child finds hugging pleasant, and they are challenging behavior like hitting, and you hug them, then the challenging behavior will increase. If they have, I don't know how ADHD would interact with hugging, but again, those are the principles that are important, is just making sure that you're not reinforcing certain behaviors. Now, on the other hand, separately, there are kids who are very sensory, I guess, fragile, or, you know, they have a very hard time with contact, and gradually acclimating them to contact is helpful, because there will be a lot of things in their lives that they might be uncomfortable with. For instance, I've had children who, okay, now as I keep talking, I think of other things to say. So I've had children who, for instance, would not even put long sleeves on because they don't like the sensory feel of that. So it's important to shape the child to the point where they are able to tolerate touch, right, or a loose hug. On the other hand, there are people who really incredibly calm down when you do give them pressure, as in a hug, which, you know, talks about like Temple's squeeze machine.
Yes.
I have children who become incredibly calm after a period of having experienced some form of pressure. It just calms them, it sensory regulates them.
Yes.
So those are all the things to consider, and it is possible that if a child is extremely hyperactive, yes, then if you give them some level of pressure for a period of time, it's possible, not always the case, it is possible that the child might downregulate a little bit.
But you would do that more as an antecedent than a consequence, right?
I would do it more, yes, I would do it more as on a schedule.
Yeah, they call it a sensory diet.
Exactly.
And they used to
Exactly.
wrap Jem like a burrito and squish him, and then he would be more attentive during the next lesson.
Exactly.
He was more regulated. But
it
it
was
was
actually-
always
yeah.
before the fact, before he fell apart.
That's right. That's right. Very important.
All right. Where did I leave off? I had a really important question. Where did it go? Where did it go? No. It was right here.
I see one about
The potty trained. That's exactly the one I
Okay.
wanted. It skipped. So Christina had said, my son is potty trained, both things, however, unable to wipe himself. How do we approach this?
So this is, again, one of those situations where it's better to teach this particular behavior when you're not doing the potty training. So you can use a doll that you can wipe. You can just practice the activity of wiping things, right?
Have you seen the really viral video right now of the teacher in a kindergarten classroom?
No.
And she's sitting in a little chair, and to the back of the chair are tied two little balloons.
Okay.
And she's sitting
love
with
this.
her back to the kindergartners, and she takes a piece of toilet paper
I
and
love
she
it.
holds it up to the kids, and she reaches between the
The
two balloons,
balloons.
and she wipes and she pulls the paper up, but they're trying to teach them to save paper. So then she folds the paper.
Okay.
And then she wipes again.
Yes.
And takes and folds the paper and puts it in the toilet. And it
Fantastic.
just makes me scream with laughter every
But
time.
that's
She's
a-
very
what a
deliberate
great
about
idea.
that.
I love
It is.
that.
It is. I love it. I love it.
So there you go. You have your answer right there. Practice with a toy, I would say with a doll or something. And then also, this is a great activity because two balloons will just kind of be exactly where you want to wipe, and teaching the child. teach it outside of the potty training.
Yeah.
And make sure to pair it with the word wipe so that they have an instruction.
There you go.
Love that.
Absolutely love it.
Great teacher.
There we go. Suyan wrote back in and said the vocal stimming was decreased, but the visual stimming has been slightly increased, and thank you for any ideas. But Suyan, we still don't know, did they lose other words or gain other words after the stimming? I think that's the question we wanted, right?
Yeah. And also decreasing, vocal stimming decreasing is okay. Disappearing completely, I've never had.
Okay. Somebody has written in and said, my son has delayed echolalia and kept saying script like drill training.
Yeah, delayed echolalia is when you hear something, usually like on a TV or something like that, and then you repeat it later. And honestly, echolalia of any type is not a bad thing. I mean, we often fear echolalia, but the truth is that echolalia is kind of, it is imitating speech. And I don't have a problem with it. Delayed echolalia can be difficult, but it is often the child trying to interact, but they're just not introducing the interaction appropriately. So they're just kind of repeating something they saw on TV, as opposed to saying, you know, on TV, on this show, so-and-so did this, and then the rest makes sense. So depending on what the issue is here, maybe you can just allow the delayed echolalia, but have your child introduce it and say what it is before they repeat.
Okay.
Now I'm going to cough, so I'm going to have
No, do it. Dozer's written in a lot more information about what is going on with the oral aversion and the feeding issues, because there were medical issues, extreme preemie, and doesn't really understand hunger because he was being fed through a tube.
Yes.
And they've also had some people who weren't real helpful, and maybe there was some misdiagnosis going on, and they're still concerned about gaining weight, and he's 7 years old, and that they tried the vibrating tool, but that really is what brought on the severe oral aversion.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking, and tell us, Dr. Granpeesheh, I just had like incredible deja vu too. I'm thinking that working with a different feeding specialist at this point is really one who's a behaviorist.
Absolutely, and you are right in that. So again, two things. One is the vibrating tool might have been too overwhelming for your child at that time. And perhaps you need to start with something that is a little bit less overwhelming and give the child a little bit of control. So for instance, putting one of those things on your fingers that is like a toothbrush for babies, allowing him to play with it a little bit, getting gradually familiar with it, or a lollipop, which is sweet and rewarding to begin with, before you go to the vibrating tool. The second thing I want to say is you're probably right. When a child is getting fed through a tube, through a G tube, they're not hungry, and so they're satiated. So they're less likely to want to do any of this type of thing because they're not hungry.
But it seems like it's almost, his oral seeking, that he's licking himself, almost, because that's a natural progression of development.
Yes.
And so it's inappropriate at this age, but he's sort of right on schedule for him.
He's beginning to explore, which is a good thing. And as I said, all infants will explore the world by putting things around their mouth and in their mouth. And so he is beginning to explore. Now you need to make sure that he starts to explore things that are okay to explore.
Yeah. And Dozer, if you want that, because the feeding expert that I met last weekend is also a board certified behavior analyst, so they're going to understand that piece of it too. If you want to be connected to them, write to me, Shannon at autism-live.com. Marianne says, I have a 4-year-old son that has ADHD, ODD, and autism, and having issues with him at school with hitting, pinching, and running away. I'm a single parent, and I'm trying to find different things to help. What can I do since he is on hold with ABA for 6 months? Because I'm guessing you're in Texas. Because Texas has a grant where they put people on for 6 months and take them off for 6 months, because apparently, they've decided to rewrite science and say that that's effective. I just want to say it's not.
Yeah. I'm not sure if that's the case, or you just have not been able to find ABA, or you're on a wait list or something, whatever it is. These are issues where you do need help, and I would So I would say that the scariest one, like what I would do immediately, is make sure that you have a GPS device on him, because running away is not one to mess with.
Yeah.
That's like one of the ones that I fear a lot. I would make sure that you spend a little bit of time really focusing on safety, and make sure that he's safe in the house, around the house, cannot run out. Safe in the school, because so many times in schools there's no attention given to the fact that the child might be running away. And then I would educate myself when I'm waiting for ABA. I would really start to learn more about challenging behavior, and when our kids hit the function of behavior. That's where you want to really focus on. And I believe if you look online and you look for lessons in ABA, you will find a lot of different online resources. IBT, or Institute for Behavioral Training, is one of them, but I'm pretty sure there's a lot of resources out there. And these are short video, very short modules, like 7 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, and so on. And they teach you why someone might hit, why they might do aggressive behaviors. And they also teach you how to handle that depending on the why. The reason helps us identify the intervention that we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
So that's how I would spend the time, honestly.
There you go. And so many people are writing in and saying thank you so much. No, we don't. We don't have more time. We went a little over with the last one, so I'm just going to go over a minute here.
Sure.
But I do want to say, I think that's all the time we have for the questions, and we almost got through all of them.
Yeah.
So I apologize. And we had others that were written in. There's never enough time. But I do want to say thank you to all of you for being here. And, we're going to be back live tomorrow with a great show that I know you guys will thoroughly enjoy. But I also want to take a moment to say a couple of things. First of all, if you haven't already, please follow us on, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, and that way you can hear important information about what's upcoming. Like in the future, we might do more of these 2-hour shows, and you'd want to know about that. And that's a great way that you can be up on what's happening. I also want to tell you that you should be following Dr. Granpeesheh on TikTok and on Instagram, and that's a great way to get your questions answered. Dr. Granpeesheh is going to step away from the studio for just a few days, not for very long. She'll be back well in time before Thanksgiving. But if you're missing her live during that time, check her out on TikTok and check her out on Instagram.
Also,
yes,
just for our viewers to know, the reason I'm not here is because I'm going to the Middle East. I'm trying to help some folks open up schools and clinics out in Saudi Arabia.
Which is really amazing.
It's wonderful. Yeah, I'm excited about that.
Can I just say, and I'm going to get emotional, what a privilege it's been to sit here with you for 2 hours. Like an hour is amazing, but to watch you listen and listen to you and watch you and see your knowledge on display is just breathtaking. No, it's the truth. It's the truth. Just accept it.
Thank you.
But I also want to thank all of you for being here and sticking with us through these 2 hours. And for those of you who are watching later in podcast, for sticking with to see this. And we hope that you'll come back for more and more. We're not going anywhere. And I hope that you all have a lovely rest of your day. We'll be back tomorrow live. Until then, give your kiddos a hug from me and one for you too. Bye-bye for now.
Bye, everyone.
Don't forget, you can watch Ask Dr. Doreen live every Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. Pacific time. We hope to see you there.